Let's talk running backs. What are your expectations for this group? I know there's one guy in this room that you really love. We have CJ Baxter listed as the number 1. Jaden Blue is the 1B. Wisner, Quintravion Wisner, who actually came in at points last year and was a little exciting in moments. And then Christian Clark, the freshman, and then the big freshman Goose, one of the bigger recruits we actually had in this cycle, was Jerrick Gibson, who's listed as the 4th guy, but I'd imagine we'll get some sort of touch as a freshman. So what do you think of this group? What's your prediction for this group overall, I would say?
Well, I think it mirrors a lot of other backfields that we've discussed in college football for the last 20-ish years, where we've got a Thunder Lightning pairing, and both guys are more versatile than just those kind of names. And I'm talking about, Baxter being the Thunder and Blue being the Lightning. Blue being a guy who, if he catches the ball out of the backfield, he's absolutely electric. And if he gets open space, he could take it for 6 every single time he touches the ball. And obviously Baxter he's a bigger body. You expect him to do more of the dirty work between the tackles, to be more so our goal line back in our traditional goal line formations. But they're both going to get a lot of run. They're both going to get a lot of touches. I don't think it's a 1-2. I think it's a 1A, 1B, and it's probably going to be dictated by who's playing better that game or the defensive personnel on the opposite side. So both of those guys will be absolutely instrumental in our success as an offense for the Texas Longhorn football team going into this season in our first year in the SEC. We talked about it. It was either last week or 2 weeks ago about, our receiver room, who's going to have to step up, Quinn and what he's going to be able to do and what he needs to accomplish from a pedigree standpoint of where he's come into college and now what he needs to get to be a guy that is really, really looked after by scouts when he declares for the draft. I expect this upcoming offseason, but the running backs will dictate everything, and Coach Choice and his running backs and those guys behind him will dictate how our team finishes this season, in my opinion. And it starts with those 2 guys. And I really like both of them. I love the call out of Wisner. Like he provides something a little different, right? And we lost Savion Red. He transferred. He's a guy that ran Wildcat QB for us for a decent amount last year, just as another option, as another look. And he now is playing with the Nevada Wolfpack. So I think Wisner is kind of a gadget guy, as a guy to get in there and just give a different look is really, really interesting. He's slight, right, in frame in comparison to Baxter and Blue. And then Gibson feels more to me like a guy who will get some touches, but is going to slot in behind Baxter as that kind of quote unquote lead role for the future for us, for the Horns.
Yeah, I'm pretty much lockstep on a lot of it. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, Baxter's the big recruit, right? Followed, quite frankly, by Gibson, who's a little shorter, but also pretty big frame. Baxter's 6'1", listed at 6'1", 220. Wisner's actually listed 6 foot 200, ditto with Blue. But it feels like Wisner's slighter. It feels like Blue's also shiftier. It feels like Baxter's 6'1", 220. And then Gibson's listed coming out of high school at 5'10", 210. So all pretty decent sized dudes. I'm excited to see how we can deploy Blue in the receiving game. That to me is still an element at times I felt, especially with Bijan there. I mean, one of the things we said in our show, or when Bijan was, Bijan, right, in his last year as a Texas Longhorn, he had 300 something receiving yards. He should have had 500. I'm not saying Blue should have that kind of output, but Blue had 140 receiving yards last year. I would love to see Blue have 300 receiving yards. If that's the case, that means we're really deploying that aspect of the game, and I think it's important. It's important for everyone as they get to the pros, right, to have that in your arsenal. But I also think that opens up even more of the passing game for Quinn and the new receivers we have that are in the building that are going to take up a lot of touches, with Worthy and Mitchell both going pro. I'm excited to see. I think Baxter, once we hit that Kansas State game last year, I think he started to come into his own more. Obviously, he had to shoulder more of the load with Jonathan Brooks being out. And I think that's where Blue came in and was like, hey, by the way, I'm still a 4-star recruit. I'm not which I'm not, Deonta Foreman, who was a add-on with Armani Foreman, right? Who was the bigger recruit of the two coming out of nowhere. I'm still a guy that was a top 300 recruit, top 100 recruit, depending on where you looked, or 150 recruit, depending on what site you looked at. I'm still here. I'm still a valuable piece. And I was glad that Sark didn't try to lean on the freshman too much and allow Blue to get his. Both guys had costly fumbles in the Washington game, which was unfortunate. But outside of that, both were really strong, both good in the Texas Tech game, where Blue shined. And again, like, complementary football is something we're looking for. So I would love to see Gibson get some looks, because you want to have that depth and you want to have guys waiting in the wings, but you don't want to like deter guys. So I would love to see him get somewhere around 30 to 40 touches this year. I think that's cool as a freshman, especially when you have guys like Baxter and Blue. But the beauty of them is you can deploy one or the other and, quite frankly, play with some fresh legs. We've seen like at Alabama time and time again. We saw guys play with fresh legs all the time. There were guys at Alabama who were the number 2 back going in the 3rd round. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, was it Josh Jacobs that didn't have a lot of touches? Was it him, or was he worked? There was someone at Bama that didn't have.
Was it Yeldon?
I mean, it could have been Brian Robinson.
Yeah, but
right?
B-Rob got that last year where he was really their guy.
The guy, right? Yeah. I mean, I'm looking at. But no, it was Josh. Dude, Josh Jacobs had 120 carries as a junior year.
Okay, well, that shows you why the Raiders were willing to run him 220 plus times every single year. Because he hadn't gotten the touches in college. So that, to your point, that is something that certain scouting departments for NFL rosters look at, and they say, okay, this guy is incredibly talented. He can do a little bit of everything on the field, but he hasn't been run like Leonard Fournette was at LSU, right? Like that.
No,
that's appealing.
Into the ground.
That's appealing. No, I think another thing to consider is, what did we believe the depth chart of our running back room to be going into week 1 last year? And even what we saw in the tape from the first game. Jonathan Brooks was not RB1 last year going into the first game. CJ Baxter was, as a true freshman. And Brooks quickly took the reins as the number 1 guy. And I don't know if that's something that had been discussed prior, like internally in the locker room, but just from watching the game and how it unfolded, game 1 of last year's season, it was very much going to be a split backfield. Baxter gets banged up early, right? I think worth mentioning for him too, that while he did have some minor injuries throughout the season, he still played 13 games. And I love that out of a guy. And again, like, we're going in thinking that Baxter's the 1A, Blue's the 1B, while acknowledging that we think they both will be heavily involved in our offense. But who knows? If Gibson gets opportunity and he starts to flourish, like, we're not going to play him. So anything is really up in the air here. But I think it's a good thing to point out with Blue in the passing game. He averaged 9.6 yards per catch last year. He only had, I think, 14 receptions, but that just shows how dynamic he is as a playmaker. And I love your point about how that will alleviate some of the pressure on our guys on the outside, because if our receivers have one-on-one opportunities, because especially in their early short or intermediate routes between 0 and 15 yards, because Blue is pulling a linebacker and his attention, like, that's big for this receiving core as they try and really make a name for themselves, really set a routine and establish rapport with Quinn Ewers, especially in the first 3 games of the season.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up Brooks in his draft. I mean, like, if you would have told me at week 1 last year that Brooks was going to be the first running back off the board, especially with the guys like Blake Corum, right, and Trey Benson, who are good running backs in the fold, like, I would have been like, you're crazy. Like, Jaden Blue, like, Keelan Robinson got drafted, and quite frankly, I was pretty surprised. But I always thought he was a really talented player that never got his shine. I think for Blue, you're talking about him opening up the pass game. You're talking about how dominant, how effective he is. Was it 9 per a reception? Was that what he was getting?
9.6, yeah.
9.6, almost 10 yards of reception. Like, as a running back, if he can showcase that part of his game, And this is this is a really strong running back. You got both kids from Ohio State. You got Ollie Gordon returning. You got the kid from Boise State, kid from UNC. And then you got Trevor Etienne, Edwards from Michigan, Neal from Kansas, Raheem Sanders moved to South Carolina from Arkansas, and then Singleton, who I think a lot of people have been waiting to break out at Penn State, not to mention Jaden Knott from Cal, Taj Brooks from Texas Tech, and Damian Martinez, who transferred from Oregon State to Miami. So there's a lot of really good running backs in this class, but then Blue's in that mix. And if you're a guy like Jaden Blue, who's still averaging 6+ yards per carry, doesn't have a lot of run on you, shows that you're good between the tackles, and is in the receiving game, I'm not saying he's going to be a first round, second round back. Like we've had back-to-back years, which is pretty underrated for Texas and not really being discussed. And kudos again to Coach Choice and Sark. But we can have a 4th round guy, 5th round guy, and Jaden Blue, with Baxter still returning and hopefully Gibson getting some of the load in both facets in the passing game and run game. So this is a group I feel very strongly about. I do want to see Baxter. And we've spoken to Chris Johnson, who's from Florida, friend of ours from the sports industry, who's a guy who's running for 2,000 yards, a guy that's mentored him with Lendell White, a guy we know, a USC rival, and they spoke so highly of CJ Baxter, knowing him pretty much like being from Florida most of his young life. So I would, as much as I want to see Blue flourish and Gibson get touches, it would be nice to see him show as advertised. So the pressure to me is on CJ Baxter a little bit to be like, hey, look, you're supposed to be this top recruit. You're supposed to be this, and you've shown flashes. Now it's time to put it together and show what and be the next great Texas running back that you're supposed to be.
I think it's a long season, right? We need both those guys to win at the highest level. Mm-hmm. We need both those guys to beat opponents in the college football playoff. When we get there, we need both of those guys deep in the season against SEC opponents. Hopefully we get to the SEC championship. We'll need both those guys in that game. We didn't have Jonathan Brooks in the second half of the season last year, and these guys stepped up, but he was our best player. So obviously I would have loved to have had him on the field. And I think, it's, you can never predict injuries, but if there's moments where we don't have to run them into a ground, both of them during a game, but in particular Baxter, who, when you talk about skill sets, I mentioned like we need him between the tackles when we need a guaranteed 3 or 4 yards. Like that has to be him that does that. Blue offers something different in open space. Baxter is fast. Baxter is strong. Baxter can stiff arm a linebacker and keep going and get you a 60-yard touchdown run. But he's not going to beat 3 defenders with his speed, and Blue can do that. So we need both of them is my point. And I don't want to jeopardize the longevity of both of their seasons by running one of these guys into the ground. And again, it's hard. You can't really take that approach. I understand that. But if we go up on teams, let's get Gibson more touches than you even said. Let's end the season with him touching the ball 70 times. Like
that'd be great. That'd be great. I mean, I think that to me, like Baxter didn't have, what was his touches last year? I mean, he ended up having more than he would have with Brooks.
Yeah, he had
138 carries.
Yeah.
To me, that with 24 receptions and received the ball well. To me, I would love to see that number be at 40 receptions. And I would love to see that at 190 carries. Or 200 maybe. I don't need like 300. Who led in carries? How many did Ollie Gordon have last year? Was it ridiculous?
I'm sure he had absurd numbers.
Yeah. So there was. Yeah. I mean, look, there was. Brooks had 290.
Ollie Gordon had 285 carries last year.
Okay, so making more realistic of where things could go, I would love to see him in that like Audric Estime from Notre Dame had 210. Devin,
I was going to say between 200 and 220 would be a really nice spot for CJ.
Blake, what did Blake Corum had 258, and what did Don Edwards have?
Edwards got hurt last year. He also just but
Marshawn Lloyd, I mean, and he was a guy I got to see up close and personal, He only had 116 goes last year, and he was a guy that made the most of it. Absolutely. So I mean, if I think that 190 to 210 range for Baxter, as long as he's making the most of his touches, is great. And that 120 to 130, 140 range for Jaden Blue as terms carries, like if both guys are fresh legs making the most of their carries, like divvying it up like that, it doesn't mean you don't more touches doesn't constitute, better numbers necessarily. Like a guy like Marshawn Lloyd, who's a 3rd round pick for the Packers, made the most of his touches, averaged 7+ yards per carry. And quite frankly, didn't start the season as a USC number 1 running back, but transferred from Mississippi State. And he was really impressive when I was watching up close and personal.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the other thing that we haven't talked about is you can run a split back set. You can put both of them out there, and you can put Blue in motion and have him line up as a wide receiver. Like that. That's the great thing about his versatility and his skills as a pass catcher. Is that they both can be out there if we need them in certain sets, and they certainly will be, knowing Sark's offensive mind and how much pressure he wants to put on a defense. And ultimately, it's about getting your playmakers the ball in space, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so whether it's screen passes to the two of them, whatever we need to do to make a defense pay, we're going to do it. And so I envision a lot of those type of get Jaden Blue the ball quickly with an opportunity for him to bounce it outside and cut up field and make the defense pay. Or, you're sleeping on Baxter's receiving ability. Great. He'll make a linebacker miss and pick up 17 yards. This will be a fun running back room to keep a finger on as the year progresses. And I mentioned Savion Red transferring, and he was a gritty football player, and I love that about him. But I never really liked those looks when we went Wildcat formation last year. I have to be honest.
No, I never liked them.
I don't really generally like them ever, but
ever. I don't like them ever at any point to me, quite frankly. Like it doesn't bode well for. It doesn't do anything for me, to be honest. Like when we did it, I hated it when we had the 18-wheeler package with Swoops. And it's nothing against Tyron Swoops, who was a good athlete. It was just like, what are we doing? This isn't effective. It's not doing anything for our team.
Yeah, I only liked the 18-wheeler package when we were in the red zone on the goal line.
Sure, when it could be like a Jalen Hurts type thing. But when we're running like the 18-wheeler package and it's 3rd and 4, we're on our own 45, it's like, all right, now you're just wasting the fans' times and money for being here. You are. Like it's like
yeah.
Now it's gotten to a point of just this is offensive.
I think it's pretty simple to me, the breakdown of that. Like no running back takes enough reps as a quarterback for them to really be a threat to a defense to throw the ball consistently and productively.
And so vice versa.
So when a quarterback is the guy touching the ball, that's when your offense is at its most difficult for a defense to decipher and to handle, always, in my opinion.
Yeah. I hope we don't see any of those looks. They're unnecessary. And again, it just takes away from, and I also think the beauty of this, and Suck's gonna have a lot of fun with it, and we'll get to receivers next time. There's no tape on the receivers for us. There's no tape on any of these receivers really that much in Sark's offense. So he has that as his disposal, which will open up the run game for these guys. But I'm excited. I think this is a year where Quinn and the receivers and the offense and Banks as a left tackle, huge left tackle prospect. Like all these guys, so much is going to be the focal point on them, and Arch, anytime he gets in the game. But we actually could have the number 2 running back duo behind Ohio State in the nation. And no one should be surprised.
I thought it's a great closing thought because these guys believe they are the number 1 running back duo in the country. I love the swagger that they both bring to the game. I love how hyped they are about the recruits that we brought in this past offseason. I love how much they love their head coach and how much they love their position coach too. So both these guys are excellent Longhorns. They seem to be excellent dudes. I haven't met either of them. Neither of us have, but I love the way they compete and I love the energy they bring when they play. And so that translates for the fans certainly. And they are going to pursue that Ohio State running back room. They will be looking at their stats game after game. They want to beat them. They want to be the best. They want to show that Texas football means running backs that succeed in the college level and in the pros. And now it's just time for them to do it.
Yeah, agreed. All right, we'll be back later this week for wide receivers with Nicky Snacks Credder, and hopefully getting Quan Cosby, who's back on the grid from a nice summer off. Fisher to Soplis. We'll see you guys next time. Hook 'em horns.
Peace.